Jake Morrison pushed open the glass door of Rosie's diner at exactly 12 o'clock. He had been doing this same thing every single day for the past 8 years. The small bell above the door rang as he walked in. The sound was so familiar to him now that he barely heard it anymore. The diner smelled like coffee and bacon. The old wooden floors creaked under his boots as he walked to his table. It was the same table he always sat at, the corner table near the window. From there, he could look out at Main Street and watch the town go by. Jake took off his brown cowboy hat and hung it on the metal hook by the booth. The hat was old and worn. It had sweat stains around the band and the edges were a bit frayed. But Jake loved that hat. His wife Sarah had given it to him 20 years ago for his birthday. He slid into the booth and sat facing the window. He always sat in the same spot, always facing the same direction. The red vinyl seat had a small tear on the left side. Jake knew every detail of this table because he had spent so many hours sitting here. Mary, one of the waitresses, came over with a pot of coffee. She was a kind woman in her 50s with gray hair pulled back in a ponytail. She had worked at the diner for 15 years. She knew Jake well. "Afternoon, Jake," she said with a warm smile. She poured coffee into his white ceramic mug without asking. She already knew he wanted it. Jake nodded at her. "Mary," he said simply. That was all. Just her name. Mary didn't mind. She was used to Jake's quiet ways. "I'll bring you today's special," she said. "It's chicken fried steak with mashed potatoes and green beans." Jake nodded again. He never looked at the menu anymore. He just ordered whatever the special was that day. It made things simple. Simple was good. Mary walked away toward the kitchen. Jake wrapped his rough, calloused hands around the warm coffee mug. His hands showed his age and his work. They were the hands of a man who had spent his whole life working with cattle and fixing fences and building things. He took a sip of coffee and looked out the window. Across the street, old Mr. Peterson was sweeping the sidewalk in front of his hardware store. 2 teenagers walked by, laughing about something on their phones. A pickup truck drove slowly down Main Street. This was Clearwater, Montana. A small town where everybody knew everybody, a place where nothing much changed. Jake had lived here his whole life. He was born here. He grew up here. He built his life here, and he had lost everything here too. The other people in the diner knew Jake. They saw him every day at the same time in the same spot. But none of them came over to talk to him. They had learned over the years that Jake didn't want company. He wasn't mean about it. He didn't tell people to go away. But something in the way he sat and the way he looked made it clear. Jake Morrison wanted to be alone. There was old Bill Henderson sitting at the counter. Bill was a retired postal worker who liked to chat with anyone who would listen. But even Bill didn't try to talk to Jake anymore. He had tried once years ago. Jake had just nodded politely and gone back to his coffee. Bill got the message. In a booth near the back, 3 women from the church were having lunch together. They glanced at Jake and then went back to their conversation. They talked about him sometimes. "Poor Jake," they would say. "So sad what happened to him." But they never tried to include him in anything. They knew he would just say no. Mary came back with Jake's lunch. She set the plate down in front of him along with silverware rolled in a white napkin. "Here you go," she said. "Can I get you anything else?" "No, ma'am," Jake said quietly. "This is fine." "Thank you." Mary smiled and walked away. She liked Jake even though he didn't talk much. He was always polite. He always said please and thank you. And he always left a good tip. Jake picked up his fork and knife and started eating. The food was good. Rosie's diner always had good food. But Jake didn't really taste it much anymore. Eating had become just something he did to keep going. Like sleeping. Like breathing. He remembered a time when meals were different. When Sarah was alive, they used to cook together in their kitchen at the ranch. She would make her special pot roast or her famous apple pie. They would sit at their kitchen table and talk about their day, about the ranch, about their kids, about everything and nothing. Their daughter Emily would tell them about school. Their son David would talk about the football game or the girl he liked. The kitchen would be full of noise and laughter and life, but that was a long time ago now. Sarah had gotten sick 9 years ago. Cancer. The doctors tried everything, but nothing worked. She fought hard for a year and a half. Jake stayed by her side the whole time. He held her hand. He told her he loved her. He promised he would be okay, but he wasn't okay. After Sarah died, everything changed. Emily and David were grown by then. Emily had gotten a job in Seattle, something with computers that Jake didn't really understand. David had moved to Florida. He worked for a company that built boats. They called sometimes. They visited on holidays. But they had their own lives now. Jake didn't blame them. That was what kids were supposed to do. Grow up and make their own way. He was proud of them. But it meant he was alone. The ranch still needed work. Cattle still needed feeding. Fences still needed fixing. So Jake kept working. He hired a couple of ranch hands to help with the heavy work. But mostly he ran the place himself. Work was good. Work kept his mind busy. But lunchtime was different. Lunchtime was when he had to sit still, had to stop moving. And that was when the loneliness would creep in like cold air under a door. So Jake had created a routine. Every day at noon he came to Rosie's diner. He sat at his table. He ate his lunch. He looked out the window, and for that 1 hour he didn't have to think. He just had to exist. The routine made him feel safe somehow. He knew what to expect. Nothing would surprise him. Nothing would hurt him. He had built a wall around himself, and as long as he stayed behind that wall, he would be fine. Jake finished his chicken fried steak. He drank the last of his coffee. He pulled out his worn leather wallet and left cash on the table with a good tip for Mary. Then he stood up, took his hat from the hook, and put it on his head. He walked out of the diner the same way he had walked in. Quietly. Alone. The bell rang above the door as he left, outside. The September afternoon was warm and sunny. Jake walked to his old blue pickup truck parked on the street. He climbed in, started the engine, and drove back to his ranch. Tomorrow he would do the same thing. And the day after that. And the day after that. This was Jake Morrison's life now. A life of routine and silence and careful distance from everyone. He told himself he was content. He told himself he didn't need anything more, but deep down in a place he tried not to look, Jake was just existing. Not living, just going through the motions day after day, protecting himself from feeling too much, from caring too much, from losing anyone else ever again. He didn't know that everything was about to change. He didn't know that tomorrow someone would break through his carefully built walls without even trying. Someone who wouldn't ask permission. Someone who wouldn't take no for an answer. Jake Morrison thought he had his life all figured out. He thought he knew exactly how the rest of his days would go. But life had other plans. Life always does. The next day started like every other day. Jake woke up at 5 in the morning when his alarm clock buzzed. He got dressed in his work jeans and a flannel shirt. He made coffee in the kitchen. He ate 2 pieces of toast with butter. Then he went outside to start his work on the ranch. The morning air was cool and fresh. Fall was coming to Montana. The leaves on the trees were starting to turn yellow and orange.
Jake loved this time of year.
He loved the crisp air and the clear blue sky. He spent the morning checking on his cattle. He had about 200 head of cattle on his ranch. They grazed in the wide open fields. Jake walked among them, making sure they all looked healthy. He checked their water tanks. He looked at the fences to see if any needed repair. By 11:30, Jake was ready for lunch. He washed his hands and face at the kitchen sink. He changed into a cleaner shirt. Then he got in his truck and drove into town. He parked in the same spot he always parked in front of the diner. He walked in at exactly 12 o'clock. The bell rang. The smell of food filled the air. Everything was exactly like it always was. Jake hung his hat on the hook and slid into his corner booth. He sat facing the window like always. He waited for Mary to bring him coffee, but something was different today. The diner was busier than usual. Every table seemed to be full. Jake noticed this but didn't think much of it. Tuesday was sometimes busy. Mary came over with the coffee pot. "Packed house today," she said as she poured his coffee. "Some kind of meeting at the town hall just let out. Everyone came here for lunch," she smiled. "Today's special is meatloaf with mashed potatoes and carrots." "Sounds good," Jake said. Mary headed back to the kitchen. Jake took a sip of his coffee and looked out the window. He was about to settle into his usual routine when he heard a voice. Oh, thank goodness, an empty seat. Jake looked up. A woman was standing next to his table. She was holding a big folder stuffed with papers and a large coffee cup from somewhere else. She looked stressed and rushed. Before Jake could say anything, she set her folder down on his table. Then she slid into the seat across from him. Jake froze. He stared at her. She had just sat down at his table. His table. Without asking. Without even waiting for him to say yes. The woman didn't seem to notice his shocked expression. She was busy pulling papers out of her folder and spreading them on the table. "Thanks so much for sharing," she said quickly. "Every other table is completely full and I have a call in like 5 minutes." Jake opened his mouth. He wanted to say something. He wanted to tell her this was his table, that he ate alone, that she needed to find somewhere else to sit, but no words came out. The woman pulled out her phone and started dialing. She had dark brown hair pulled back in a messy bun. She wore a gray business suit that looked a bit wrinkled. She had papers scattered everywhere. "Hi, yes, this is Elena Martinez," she said into her phone. Her voice was quick and professional. "I'm calling about the Henderson property dispute." "Yes, I have the survey results right here." Jake just sat there. He didn't know what to do. Part of him wanted to get up and leave. But something stopped him. Maybe it was pride. Maybe he didn't want to make a scene. Or maybe he was just too surprised to move. Elena kept talking on the phone. "The property line runs 15 feet east of where they thought it did. Yes, that means the shed is actually on their land, not the neighbor's land." She shuffled through her papers while she talked. Mary came back with Jake's meatloaf. She saw Elena sitting at the table and her eyes went wide. She looked at Jake with a questioning expression. Jake just shook his head slightly. Mary set down his plate and walked away, glancing back over her shoulder. Jake started eating his lunch. He tried to ignore the woman across from him, but it was hard. She was right there, talking, moving papers around, taking up space in his carefully organized world. "I'll have those documents to you by end of day," Elena said into her phone. "Yes, okay, thank you, bye." She hung up and immediately started writing notes on a yellow legal pad. Jake ate his meatloaf. It tasted good, but he barely noticed. He was too aware of the person sitting across from him. This hadn't happened in 8 years. 8 years of eating alone at this table. And now this woman had just sat down like it was nothing. Elena's phone rang again. She answered it. "Elena Martinez." She listened. "No, that's not what the zoning law says. Let me pull up the ordinance." She started typing on her phone with one hand while holding it to her ear with the other. Jake noticed she hadn't ordered any food. She just had her coffee from somewhere else. She was using the diner table like an office. He took another bite of meatloaf. He could feel people in the diner watching them. This was probably the most interesting thing that had happened in Clearwater all week. Jake Morrison, the man who always ate alone, had someone sitting at his table. Elena finished her second call. She set down her phone and took a long drink of coffee. Then she finally seemed to notice Jake was actually there. She looked at him. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I know I just barged in on you. It's been a crazy morning." She had brown eyes that looked tired but kind. Every other seat really was taken. "I hope you don't mind." Jake didn't know what to say. He did mind. But she was already sitting there, and she seemed like she was having a hard day. "It's fine," he heard himself say. The words surprised him. "Thanks," Elena said. She smiled at him. It was a genuine smile. "I'm Elena, by the way. I just moved to Clearwater a few weeks ago." Jake nodded. "Jake. Nice to meet you, Jake." Elena's phone started buzzing with text messages. She looked at it and sighed. "Sorry, I have to answer these." She went back to her phone and her papers. Jake went back to his lunch. They sat across from each other in silence. Well, not complete silence. Elena was muttering to herself as she read through documents. But she wasn't talking to Jake anymore. It was strange. Jake felt uncomfortable, but not as angry as he thought he would be. There was something about this woman. She wasn't trying to make conversation with him. She wasn't asking him nosy questions. She was just there, busy with her own stuff. Jake finished his lunch. He drank his coffee. He was about to leave when Elena's phone rang again. "This is Elena," she answered. She listened. Her face changed. She looked worried. "What? When?" Okay. I'll be right there." She hung up and started shoving papers back into her folder. "I have to go," she said to Jake, even though he hadn't asked. "My dad, he's having trouble breathing. I need to get to his house." She stood up quickly, grabbing her folder and her coffee cup. "Is he okay?" Jake asked. The words came out before he could stop them. Elena looked surprised that he asked. "I don't know, I hope so. He has lung problems. Sometimes it gets bad." She looked scared now under her professional appearance. "Where does he live?" Jake asked. "The old Murphy place." "Out on County Road 12, Elena said. Jake knew that house. It was about 10 miles out of town. "Pretty isolated. Drive safe," Jake said. "Thanks," Elena said. "And thanks for letting me share your table. Sorry again for just sitting down." She rushed out of the diner, her papers flying a bit as she moved. Jake sat there for a moment. The table felt empty now. Emptier than it had before she sat down somehow. He could still see the spot where her coffee cup had been. There was a slight ring of moisture on the table. He stood up and put cash on the table for his lunch. He put on his hat. As he walked out, he saw Mary watching him. "That was interesting," Mary said carefully. Jake didn't respond. He just walked out to his truck. As he drove back to his ranch, Jake thought about what had happened. A woman had sat at his table. She had invaded his space, his routine. She hadn't asked permission, and the strangest part was, he hadn't hated it as much as he thought he would. He thought about Elena's worried face when she got the call about her father. He thought about how she said she had just moved to town. New in town and her father was sick. That couldn't be easy. Jake shook his head. It wasn't his business. He didn't need to think about it. Tomorrow, things would go back to normal. She probably wouldn't even be at the diner again. But as Jake worked in his barn that afternoon, fixing a broken gate, he kept thinking about the woman with the papers and the worried eyes. He kept thinking about how his table had felt different with someone sitting across from him. He told himself he was glad it was over. Glad he could go back to his quiet routine tomorrow, but somewhere deep inside, in a place he didn't want to admit existed, Jake Morrison felt something he hadn't felt in years. He felt curious about what would happen next. The next day, Jake drove to the diner at his usual time. He told himself everything would be back to normal. His table would be empty. He would eat alone like always. The strange interruption from yesterday would be forgotten. But when he walked into the diner, there she was. Elena was already sitting at his table. She had her folder and papers spread out again. She was on the phone. Jake stopped in the doorway. He stared at his table, at the woman who was sitting in what had been his private space for 8 years. Elena looked up and saw him. She put her hand over her phone. "Is this your regular table?" she asked. "I'm so sorry. The diner is full again. I can move if you want." Jake looked around. She was right. Every other table was full. There were people waiting by the door for seats. And Elena was already settled with all her papers. "It's okay," Jake said. He walked over and hung his hat on the hook. Then he sat down across from her. Again. Elena smiled at him with relief and went back to her phone call. Jake sat there feeling strange. This was wrong. This wasn't how things were supposed to be, but he couldn't make himself tell her to leave. Mary came over with wide eyes. She poured Jake's coffee without saying anything, but her expression said it all. She was shocked. Jake Morrison was letting someone share his table for a second day in a row. Over the next 2 weeks, something impossible happened. Elena sat at Jake's table 4 more times. Not every day. Her schedule seemed unpredictable. But when she did come to the diner, she always ended up at his table. Jake told himself he was just being polite, that he was raised to be kind to people, that it would be rude to tell her to leave. But the truth was stranger than that. He was starting to not mind her being there. Elena never tried to force conversation with him. She was always busy with her work, on her phone, reading papers, writing notes. But sometimes she would look up and make a comment. "This zoning law makes no sense," she muttered one day while reading a document. She wasn't really talking to Jake. She was just thinking out loud. But Jake found himself responding. "Most laws don't make sense to regular people." Elena looked up, surprised that he had spoken. "You're probably right about that," she smiled. "Do you know anything about property boundaries?" "Some," Jake said. "I own a ranch. Had to deal with survey issues once or twice." "Really?" Elena looked interested. "Maybe you can help me understand something." And just like that, they were talking. Not a lot. Jake wasn't suddenly chatty, but Elena would ask him questions about land and property, about rural life, about Montana, and Jake would answer. Short answers at first, but answers. On Elena's 3rd visit to his table, she told him more about herself. It came out naturally while she was frustrated with a case. I can't believe I left Denver for this, she said, staring at her papers. Then she looked up at Jake. Sorry, I'm just tired. I moved here from Denver 3 weeks ago. My dad lives here and he's not doing well. He has COPD, that's a lung disease. He needs help now. That's hard, Jake said. Yeah, Elena said. She looked sad. I was a corporate lawyer in Denver. Big firm. But when Dad got sick, I couldn't just leave him alone. So I quit. Moved back to Clearwater. Started my own practice doing land use in real estate law. She laughed, but it wasn't a happy laugh. From corporate law to arguing about fence lines. Taking care of family is important, Jake said. Elena looked at him. Really looked at him. Thank you for saying that. A lot of people back in Denver thought I was crazy to give up my career. Jake shrugged. Those people probably never had to make a hard choice. Elena smiled. You're probably right. Her phone rang again and she went back to work. But something had changed. There was an understanding between them now. They were both people who had made sacrifices, who had lost things, who were trying to do their best. On her fourth visit, Elena asked Jake a direct question. You're Jake Morrison, aren't you? You own the Morrison Ranch north of town. Jake was surprised. How did you know that? My dad talks about you, Elena said. He's lived in Clearwater his whole life. He says you're the best cattleman in 3 counties but stubborn as a mule. She said it matter-of-factly with no judgment. Your dad is? Jake asked. Carlos Martinez. He worked at the feed store for 30 years before he retired. Jake knew Carlos. A good man, quiet but hard-working. I didn't know Carlos was sick. I'm sorry to hear that. Thank you, Elena said. He's hanging in there. They fell into a comfortable silence. Jake ate his lunch. Elena worked on her papers. It felt strange to Jake how natural this was starting to feel. One day, Mary came over to refill Jake's coffee. She looked at Elena and smiled. You two want me to bring you both the special today? Elena looked embarrassed. Oh, I should probably order something. I've been taking up this table without buying food. That's terrible. You bought coffee, Jake said. Then he surprised himself by adding, but you should eat. Long day ahead, Elena smiled at him. You're right. Yes, Mary, I'll take the special too. Mary walked away with a knowing look on her face. Jake knew what she was thinking. The whole town would be talking about this by tomorrow. Jake Morrison sharing his table and eating lunch with someone. But Jake found that he didn't care as much as he thought he would. As the days went by, Jake learned more about Elena. She was 34 years old. She had been married once, but her husband died in a car accident 3 years ago. A drunk driver hit him on his way home from work. Elena had been devastated. She told Jake this one day when she was tired and her guard was down. I threw myself into work after he died, she said quietly. Worked 70-hour weeks. Took every case I could. I thought if I stayed busy enough, I wouldn't have to feel the pain. Jake understood that better than she knew. Did it work? No, Elena said. You can't run from grief. It catches you eventually. Jake looked down at his coffee. Yeah, he said softly. It does. Elena looked at him with understanding in her eyes. She didn't ask him questions. She didn't push. But in that moment, they both knew. They both understood what it was like to lose someone you love. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who had both walked through fire and survived. After that, things changed again. The conversations became a bit longer, a bit more personal. Not a lot. Jake was still Jake, he still didn't talk much. But Elena had somehow found a crack in his armor. One day, Elena mentioned she was having trouble with a case. I have a client who's fighting with his neighbor about a fence line. I need someone to go look at the property and give me an opinion about where the fence should actually be. Someone who knows ranching and understands how these old properties were laid out. She wasn't looking at Jake when she said it, but he knew what she was really asking. I could take a look, Jake heard himself say. Elena looked up. Really? I could pay you for your time. No need, Jake said. Just tell me where the property is, Elena smiled. It was the biggest smile he had seen from her. That would be amazing. Thank you. The next day, Jake drove out to look at the property Elena had told him about. It took him about an hour. He walked the land, looked at the old markers, checked the survey. When he was done, he had a clear opinion about where the fence should be. He called the number Elena had given him. She answered on the second ring. This is Elena. It's Jake. I looked at that property. Already? Wow, thank you. She sounded happy. What did you find? Jake told her his opinion. He explained his reasoning. Elena listened carefully and asked smart questions. "This is incredibly helpful," she said. "Can you write this up for me? Just a simple statement of what you found?" "Sure," Jake said. "Thank you so much, Jake, really." After he hung up, Jake realized something. He had just volunteered to help someone. He had made a phone call to someone who wasn't his kids. He had engaged with the world outside his ranch and his routine. It felt strange, but it also felt a little bit good. A few days later, Elena came to the diner excited. She sat down at Jake's table with a big smile. "We won," she said. "The case. Your statement was perfect. The judge agreed with our interpretation. My client gets to keep his fence where it is." "That's good," Jake said, but he found himself smiling a little too. "It's more than good," Elena said. "It's my first win in my new practice. I was starting to wonder if I made a mistake leaving Denver. But this helps." "You made the right choice," Jake said. "Taking care of your dad. Being here." Elena looked at him with warmth in her eyes. "Thanks, Jake, that means a lot." That evening, Jake drove home to his ranch thinking about the past few weeks. Elena had broken into his careful routine. She had invaded his private space. She had made him talk, made him help, made him care. And somehow, without him even realizing it was happening, his life had started to feel a little bit less empty. October came to Clearwater with cold mornings and beautiful colored leaves. Jake noticed the changes more than he had in years. The orange and red leaves against the blue sky, the way the morning frost made the grass sparkle. He wasn't sure why he was noticing these things again, but he had a feeling it had something to do with Elena. She came to the diner at least twice a week now. Sometimes 3 times. Jake never knew which days she would be there, but he found himself wondering about it as he drove into town each day. Would she be there today? Would his table be empty? Or would she be sitting across from him with her papers and her phone and her busy energy? One Tuesday, Jake walked into the diner and Elena wasn't there. His table was empty. He sat down alone like he used to. Mary brought him coffee. He ordered the special. Everything was exactly like it had been for 8 years, but it felt wrong. The table felt too big, too empty. Jake realized with surprise that he had been looking forward to seeing Elena. He had wanted to know how her dad was doing, wanted to hear about her cases, wanted to share his space with someone again. This worried him. He had spent years building walls around himself, protecting himself from feeling too much, from getting close to anyone. And now, without even trying, this woman had walked right through those walls. Jake ate his lunch alone that day. He told himself it was better this way, safer, less complicated. But the lunch tasted bland and the hour felt very long. The next day, Elena was back. Jake felt relief when he walked in and saw her at the table. She looked tired. There were dark circles under her eyes. "Rough night?" Jake asked as he sat down. Elena looked up from her papers. She seemed surprised by his question. "Yeah, Dad had a bad night. Couldn't breathe well. I almost took him to the hospital, but he refused to go. He's stubborn. Runs in the family," Jake said with a small smile. Elena laughed. It was a tired laugh, but genuine. "You're probably right about that. He eating okay?" Jake asked.
He didn't know why he asked.
But he wanted to know. "Not really," Elena said. She looked worried. "He doesn't have much appetite. I try to make him soup and things that are easy to eat, but he barely touches it." Jake thought about this. After Sarah died, people from the church had brought him food. So much food. He remembered one soup in particular. Sarah's friend had made it. It was a beef and vegetable soup that was easy to eat but filling and healthy. He had actually eaten that soup when he couldn't eat anything else. That night, Jake did something he hadn't done in years. He cooked. He made a big pot of beef and vegetable soup. He used Sarah's old recipe that he found in her handwritten cookbook. He added carrots and potatoes and celery and good beef broth. While the soup simmered on the stove, Jake thought about Sarah, about how she used to cook for people when they were sick or going through hard times. She always said food was a way to show you cared when words weren't enough. Jake ladled the soup into a large container. He put a lid on it. Then he drove to Carlos Martinez's house on County Road 12. It was 7 o'clock at night. He sat in his truck in front of the house for a few minutes. This was strange. He didn't do things like this. He didn't get involved in other people's lives. But somehow he had made the soup and now he was here and it seemed too late to turn back. Jake got out of the truck with the container of soup. He walked up to the front door. He could turn around. He could just leave the soup on the porch and drive away. But instead he knocked. Elena opened the door. She looked surprised to see him. "Jake, what are you doing here?" "I made soup," Jake said. He held out the container. "For your dad. It's easy to eat." "Might help." Elena stared at him. Then her eyes got a little wet. "You made soup for my dad?" Jake felt uncomfortable. "It's nothing. Just had extra." That was a lie, but he said it anyway. "Jake Morrison, this is not nothing." Elena took the container from him. "This is one of the kindest things anyone has done for us since I moved here." "Thank you," Jake nodded. He didn't know what to say. "Hope it helps. Do you want to come in?" Elena asked. "Meet my dad?" Jake hadn't planned on that. But Elena was already opening the door wider. So he stepped inside. The house was small but clean. There were papers spread out on the dining room table. Medical equipment in the corner. An oxygen tank next to an old recliner where an elderly man sat watching television. "Dad, this is Jake Morrison," Elena said. "He brought us soup." Carlos Martinez looked up. He was thin and his breathing was labored, but his eyes were sharp and kind. "Morrison? From the ranch?" His voice was raspy. "Yes, sir," Jake said. "Good man," Carlos said. "Always treated me right at the feed store. Never tried to haggle or complain like some others." "You always gave me fair service," Jake said. Carlos smiled. He started to cough. It was a bad cough that shook his whole body. Elena put her hand on his shoulder and waited until it passed. "I'll let you rest," Jake said. "Just wanted to drop off the soup." "Thank you," Carlos said when he could speak again. "Elena works too hard. Doesn't have time to cook much." "Dad," Elena said with embarrassment in her voice. Jake tipped his hat to Carlos and headed for the door. Elena followed him outside. "Thank you again," she said. "Really, this means a lot." "Just soup," Jake said. "It's not just soup," Elena said. She looked at him in the dim porch light. "You're a good man, Jake Morrison. I'm glad I sat at your table that day." Jake didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded and walked back to his truck. As he drove away, he saw Elena standing on the porch watching him go. He felt something warm in his chest, something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Over the next few weeks, something shifted between Jake and Elena. They were becoming friends. Real friends, not just people who shared a table at the diner. They talked more. They helped each other. Elena asked Jake's advice about her legal cases when they involved rural property or ranching issues. Jake found himself thinking through the problems and giving her his honest opinion. He was good at this. He understood the land and how people thought about it. Jake, in turn, found that Elena was easy to talk to. She never pushed him, but she listened when he did talk. One day he mentioned that his daughter Emily hadn't called in a while and he worried about her. Elena asked him if he had tried calling Emily. "I don't want to bother her," Jake said. "She's busy with her job." "I bet she'd love to hear from you," Elena said. "My dad always says the same thing about bothering me, but I love when he calls even if I'm busy. It makes me feel connected to him." That evening, Jake called Emily. They talked for an hour. Emily was surprised and happy to hear from him. She told him about her job and her boyfriend and her life in Seattle. Jake listened and asked questions. When they hung up, he felt good. He texted Elena a simple message. "Thanks for the advice. Called my daughter." "Good talk," Elena wrote back immediately. "That's wonderful, see? You're not a bother. You're her dad and she loves you." In November, Carlos Martinez got pneumonia. Elena was scared. Jake heard about it when he went to the diner and Elena wasn't there for 3 days in a row. He asked Mary if she knew what was going on. "Elena's dad is in the hospital," Mary said. "Real sick from what I hear." Jake didn't think about it. He just acted. He drove to the hospital. He found Carlos's room. Elena was sitting in a chair next to the bed. She looked exhausted. Carlos was sleeping, hooked up to machines. "Jake?" Elena looked up when he walked in. "What are you doing here?" "Heard Carlos was sick," Jake said. "Came to see how you were doing." Elena's face crumpled a little. "He's really sick, Jake. The pneumonia is bad." "They're giving him strong antibiotics, but he's so weak already from the COPD." "I'm scared." Jake sat down in the other chair in the room. "He's a fighter. I could see that when I met him." "I can't lose him," Elena said softly. "He's all I have left." "You won't be alone," Jake said. "Even if..." He couldn't finish the sentence. But Elena understood. She reached over and took Jake's hand. They sat like that for a long time. Just holding hands, not talking. Just being there together. Carlos survived the pneumonia. It took 2 weeks, but he pulled through. When he came home from the hospital, Jake helped Elena set up some equipment in the house. He moved furniture. He carried the heavy oxygen tanks. He made sure everything was in the right place. "You don't have to do all this," Elena said as Jake worked. "I know," Jake said, "but I want to." Carlos watched from his recliner. "You two are good together," he said with a weak smile. Elena blushed. Jake pretended not to hear. But Carlos's words stayed with him as he drove home that night. In late November, Jake did something that surprised his kids. He called them both and said he was coming for Thanksgiving. Emily was in Seattle. David was in Florida. Jake said he would go to Emily's place for Thanksgiving. It was the first time he had left Montana for a holiday since Sarah died. When he told Elena about his plans at the diner, she smiled big. "Jake, that's wonderful. I'm so proud of you." "It's just Thanksgiving," Jake said. "It's more than that, and you know it," Elena said. Jake thought about this. She was right. It was more than Thanksgiving. It was him choosing to connect with his family again, choosing to live instead of just exist. And he knew that Elena was a big part of why he was making this choice. She had sat down at his table without permission. She had broken through his walls without even trying, and somehow she had helped him find his way back to life. December brought snow to Clearwater, big white flakes that covered the ranch and the town in a blanket of white. Jake loved the snow. It made everything quiet and peaceful. He had come back from Thanksgiving at Emily's house different somehow. The trip had been good. Really good. Emily had introduced him to her boyfriend, a nice young man who worked as a teacher. David had flown up from Florida too, surprising everyone. The three of them had spent the long weekend together, talking, laughing, remembering Sarah, making new memories. Emily had asked Jake about Elena. "Dad, you've mentioned this Elena person like 5 times. Who is she?" Jake had felt his face get warm. "She's just a friend, a lawyer in Clearwater. She sits at my table at the diner sometimes." Both Emily and David had looked at each other and smiled. "What?" Jake had asked. "Nothing, Dad," Emily said. "It's just nice to hear you talk about someone like that. You sound happy when you mention her." Jake had thought about that conversation a lot on the flight home. Did he sound happy when he talked about Elena? He supposed he did, because she did make him happy. She made him feel alive again. The first Monday in December, Jake got to the diner at noon like always. But this time he didn't sit at his corner table. Instead, he asked Mary for a table by the window. A bigger table, one that had 4 chairs instead of a booth. Mary's eyes went wide. "Jake Morrison, are you switching tables?" "Yes, ma'am," Jake said. "Figure it's time for a change." Mary smiled like she knew a secret. "I'll get you set up." Jake sat down at the new table. He ordered 2 coffees. Then he waited. Elena walked in at 12:15. She looked around for Jake at his usual spot. When she didn't see him there, she looked confused. Then she saw him at the new table. He waved her over. She walked to the table with a curious expression. "New table? Thought we could use more space," Jake said. He pushed one of the coffees toward her. "Got your coffee?" Elena sat down slowly. She looked at Jake with something in her eyes. Something warm and wondering. "You ordered me coffee." "You always drink coffee," Jake said. "Jake Morrison, did you just invite me to have lunch with you?" Elena asked. She was smiling, but her voice was soft. "I suppose I did," Jake said. He felt nervous but good. "If you want to, that is." "I'd love to," Elena said. They had lunch together that day. Really together. Not just sharing a table, but actually eating together. They talked about Elena's work and Jake's ranch. They talked about Carlos, who was getting a bit stronger each day. They talked about Jake's trip to Seattle. "I'm so glad you went," Elena said. "Family is important." "You helped me see that," Jake said. "You've helped me see a lot of things." Elena reached across the table and put her hand on his. "You've helped me too, you know. This move back to Clearwater was hard. Starting over was hard, but you made it easier. You've been a real friend to me, Jake." Jake looked at her hand on his. He turned his hand over and held hers. "More than a friend," he said quietly. "At least I'd like it to be more." If you want that too. Elena's eyes got a little wet. I'd like that very much. They sat there holding hands across the table. Mary came over to take their order and saw them. She smiled and walked away to give them a minute. The whole diner was watching, but Jake didn't care. For the first time in 8 years, he didn't care what people thought. Over the next few weeks, Jake and Elena's relationship grew. They saw each other outside the diner now. Jake came over to help with Carlos. He'd sit and watch football with the older man while Elena worked on her cases. Carlos told Jake stories about old Clearwater, and Jake listened with interest. Elena came out to Jake's ranch. He showed her around, showed her the cattle and the barn and the house. She saw the photos of Sarah and the kids on the walls. She was beautiful, Elena said, looking at a photo of Sarah. She was, Jake agreed. She was a good woman. I'm not trying to replace her, Elena said carefully. I just want you to know that. Jake took Elena's hand. I know that. Sarah will always be part of my life, part of who I am. But that doesn't mean I can't move forward, can't find happiness again. He looked at Elena. With you. Elena kissed him then. It was their first kiss. It was gentle and sweet and full of promise. In January, something important happened. Elena had been working on a big case for weeks. A conservation group wanted to buy a large piece of ranch land to protect it from development. But the paperwork was complicated. There were water rights and easements and all sorts of legal issues. Elena had been stressed about it. The deal was worth a lot to her practice. But more than that, she believed in protecting the land. She wanted to do good work that mattered. Jake listened to her talk about the case over lunch one day. He thought about his own ranch, about all the land he owned. He wasn't getting younger. His kids didn't want to run the ranch. Eventually, he would have to decide what to do with the property. What if I sold part of my ranch? Jake said suddenly. Elena looked up from her soup. What? To the conservation group, Jake said. I've got 800 acres. What if I sold 200 of it to them? For conservation, to keep it as open space forever. Elena stared at him. Jake, are you serious? Yeah, Jake said. He had been thinking about this for a while, actually. I don't need all that land. And I like the idea of protecting it, making sure it stays wild and open. That would be amazing, Elena said. But it's a big decision. You should think about it. I have thought about it, Jake said. And I'd want you to handle the legal work. You know my land. You understand what I want. Elena looked overwhelmed. This would be huge for my practice. And for the conservation effort. Jake, I don't know what to say. Say yes, Jake said. Help me do this. Yes, Elena said. Yes, absolutely yes. The next few months were busy. Elena worked on the legal documents for Jake's land sale. It was complicated work, but she loved it. This was the kind of law she had wanted to do. Work that mattered. Work that made a difference. Jake met with the conservation group. They were excited about his land. It connected to other protected areas. It had a creek running through it. It was perfect for wildlife habitat. In March, they signed the papers. Jake sold 200 acres of his ranch to the Conservation Trust. The land would be protected forever. Never developed. Always wild and open. At the signing, Jake held Elena's hand. This felt right. This felt like he was doing something good with what he had. Something Sarah would have been proud of. You did a great thing today, Elena told him after the signing. We did it together, Jake said. That night, Jake took Elena to dinner at the nicest restaurant in Clearwater. It wasn't fancy by city standards, but it was nice for a small Montana town. They sat by the window and ate steak and talked about everything and nothing. I love you, Jake said in the middle of dessert. Elena looked at him with tears in her eyes. I love you too. It had been almost a year since Elena had sat down at Jake's table without permission. 1 year since she had barged into his carefully ordered life and changed everything. Jake thought about that first day sometimes. How annoyed he had been. How much he had wanted her to leave. How his whole body had wanted to run away from the connection she offered. And now he couldn't imagine his life without her. In April, Carlos had a good day. His breathing was better. His color was better. He sat in his recliner and watched Jake and Elena making dinner together in his kitchen. You two should get married, Carlos said suddenly. Elena dropped the spoon she was holding. Dad, what? Carlos said. I'm old and sick. I can say what I want. And I want to see my daughter married to a good man before I die. You're not dying, Elena said firmly. We're all dying, Carlos said. Just some of us faster than others. And I want to know you're taken care of, mija. Jake and Elena looked at each other. They hadn't talked about marriage. It seemed too soon. But as Jake looked at Elena's face, he realized it didn't feel too soon. It felt right. What do you think? Jake asked Elena quietly. About what? Elena asked, even though she knew. About what your dad said. About getting married. Elena smiled. Are you proposing to me while making spaghetti in my dad's kitchen? I guess I am, Jake said. He put down the pasta he was stirring and took Elena's hands. I know it's only been a year, but I love you. I want to spend my life with you. Will you marry me? Elena started crying. Yes, I'll marry you. Carlos clapped from his recliner. Finally, something good happens. They got married in June. It was a small wedding in Clearwater, just family and close friends. Emily and David flew in. They loved Elena immediately. Carlos was there wearing oxygen tubes but smiling huge. Mary from the diner came. So did Rosie, the owner. Bill Henderson from the post office. Half the town showed up, actually. Jake Morrison getting married was big news in Clearwater. They got married outside under the Montana sky, the mountains in the background. The sun shining bright. Jake wore his best suit and his good Stetson. Elena wore a simple white dress and looked beautiful. When the minister asked if anyone objected, Carlos coughed loudly and said, "Get on with it. I'm not getting any younger." Everyone laughed. Jake and Elena moved into the ranch house together. Elena set up an office in one of the spare bedrooms. She still ran her practice, but now she came home to Jake every night. They cooked dinner together. They sat on the porch and watched the sunset. They talked about their days. Carlos stayed in his house, but they visited him almost every day.